Hi, I'm Joe from School of Rock North Buffalo. When we're not making musicians, we're also fixing gear. So if you have a guitar or bass in need of love, if you need new strings, please bring it in. We'll be more than happy to help you. So not only do we do instruction and performance-based music, we also fix gear. So please bring it down to 9310 Treds Road, East Amherst, or you can give me a call at 716-317-7625. Again, School of Rock North Buffalo. We make musicians and we fix your gear.
On this episode, Steve Lynch from Autograph and his new book, Confessions of a Rock Guitarist.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Talking About Rock. I'm Rob Edwards. Here we bring you rock interviews from veteran and upcoming artists. Subscribe on our YouTube channel to stay up to date, and follow us on our social media and our website, talkingaboutrock.com. Okay, today's guest is best known as the co-founder and lead guitarist for the hard rock band Autograph, and for his multi-finger tapping technique and challenging guitar solos. Here to speak with us regarding his new book, Confessions of a Rock Guitarist, out May 20th. Let's welcome Steve Lynch. Steve, how are you, man?
Hello. Hey, how you doing, Rob? Good to see you, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. So, been reading the new book. You've definitely had more than your fair share, man, of ups and downs growing up outlined in this book, for sure. But it seemed, man, at first you're always in the wrong place at the wrong time. But then that finally led to you being into the right place at the exact right time.
Right, exactly. It's like you have to navigate through all these little things. And then, once you make it through to the other side, then you're fine. But yeah, there was just a lot of different peaks and valleys that I went through, and luckily I made it out pretty much unscathed, But, you look back at those things and, even though they're not funny at the time, but when you look back at them, you go, actually, that's a pretty humorous story.
Right. Right. We all say those are like the things that made us, right? All our experiences, things like that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just from a little child, you were like in some pretty bad circumstances a couple times, It's like,
there were stories my mom and dad would tell me that it was like I was constantly trying to commit suicide or something, but I wasn't.
I think you were just living dangerously. I'll just say that.
Exactly. From a young age, and so but that's fine.
Yeah,
I made it through.
You made it through all that, definitely. And then, so I was reading, you originally started out playing bass, but switched to guitar when you heard of Hendrix's death on September 28th, 1970.
I was a big Hendrix fan from the time. Are You Experienced came out in 1967, and there was a kid down the block, that already played guitar. So he said, why don't you try playing bass? So I said, okay, and so we were going to put a little band together. But then Hendrix passed away, and a couple years later, and I just thought, I've always wanted to play guitar, and I just idolized Hendrix. And so I switched over guitar that day. September 18th, 1970 is when he passed away, and that was it. I traded in my bass for electric guitar, Stratocaster, of course. So
yeah, he has influenced so many people and shaken up the world, just like the Beatles did. Almost every person I talked to, it's like, we saw the Beatles, that's what we wanted to do. We saw Hendrix, These people changed what music would be like, and they didn't even know it yet, what was going to happen.
No, they didn't. They were just, musicians trying to scrape by, trying to get a record deal, and the same old him and haw, that you go through. And then, but then you have that writing element, and then all of a sudden the band really clicks, and that's what happens. And you have this magic that occurs, and it's just a wonderful thing. And I think that what a lot of people did back in the 60s and the 70s is they weren't gearing their music so much towards commerciality. Like Pink Floyd, they had their songs running together, on the Dark Side of the Moon album, so they weren't really looking at singles. They just wanted to do a concept album. You know, Led Zeppelin's first album was like that too. They were running songs together, and the songs were long, and they didn't really think about commerciality. They were just thinking about playing what they really felt and communicating with the audience that way.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's kind of what's at the forefront nowadays. You know what I mean? Is it going to sell? Is it going to stream? Is it going to get plays? You know,
right,
whatever.
right.
Is the video going to get seen like that? Doesn't seem to have the depth that the music used to have to it. You know what I mean?
Right, right. And, you know, you start adding in the AI, you know, and all these electronic, you know, beats and stuff like that. And you got to have musicians playing on it. I mean, that's the true embodiment of the whole thing. And if you don't have that, you lose that element, you know. So it's one of those things where you got to play with feel, and a machine doesn't do that. It's got to be a human being. So
100%. Yeah, I see a lot of performers, you know, up and coming younger kids and stuff. You know, but they play with so much feeling and so much style. You know they're feeling the music, and the audience definitely gravitates toward that. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, definitely very, very cool. And not only been writing a lot, you've also developed a signature two-handed tapping technique, and you also published a couple books on that as well.
Yeah, I put out 3 books called the Right Touch Books 1, 2, and 3, and when I was going, I played it a little bit when I was playing in bands up in Seattle back from 73 to 1978. I was playing, 73 to 1978. I was playing in top 40 bands up there. And, you know, I saw Harvey Mandel, who used to play with John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, but he was doing a little bit of that stuff, you know, and I went, wow, what's that? You know, and then there was another local guy up there named Steve Buffington that was also, you know, experimenting with that a little bit. And there's still, but anyway, and then when I went to the Guitar Institute of Technology in March of 78, just a couple months after, there was the guy Emmett Chapman who invented the Chapman stick, you know, and it's one where you play with your left hand, the lower register of notes, 5 bass notes basically, and then with your right hand, you play the 5 thinner strings, which are for the triads and the melodies and solos and stuff like that. And so after he did that clinic, you know, I asked him, you know, about, he mentioned during the clinic that he played guitar to a point where he wanted to, you know, be able to accompany himself, just like on a piano, left hand copying the lower register and then right hand copying on the higher register. And so I handed him my guitar and he showed me, you know, just like this one little thing, like a pentatonic scale. And he showed one position here, and then he took his right hand and played another position above it, and he just went, and I went, that's it. And that's cool. I'm going to do that. So luckily it was at the beginning of the year. And so what I did was I wrote down everything that I was learning, all the triads, all of the arpeggios, all the scales, all the chord inversions, you know, the interval skips and all that kind of stuff. I wrote it down two-handed, you know, so that I could visualize what it looked like. So I came up with this whole concept of circles, squares, and triangles, you know, to be able to tell which hand was doing what. And so I had a stack of papers about that high, you know, when I completed the school year. And so after I played at the graduation ceremony, and I played a couple of songs, old jazz standards that were, you know, using both hands on the fingerboard throughout the whole songs. And Tommy Tedesco, who was the #1 jazz guy, you know, the #1 studio session guitar player through the 50s and the 60s and into the 70s, he was one of the teachers at the school, and so was Howard Roberts. He's the one that wrote the curriculum for the school. They both approached me after the graduation ceremony, after I performed, and they said, man, you should write a book about that technique. And I kind of laughed, and I said, you know what? I've got probably 3 or 4 books worth of material already written down. And so I met with them the next day, and they took me to their publisher. And I showed the publisher, Dale Zdenek, you know, exactly what I had created here. And within 10 minutes, I had a publishing deal, and that was that. So, yeah.
Excellent. Very cool. Yeah. And Autograph went on tour with some really heavy hitters back in the day, right? You guys played with Kiss, Motley Crue, Heart, Aerosmith. Ronnie Dio, Bryan Adams, Whitesnake, and of course, it started with the Van Halen 1984 tour.
Right, the Van Halen tour. Yeah, that was the first one. And what happened was, we all four of us, or all five of us, I should say, were each had record deals. Me and the keyboard player were playing with Holly Penfield on Dreamland Records. Steve Plunkett was playing on Columbia Records. With Earl Slick in a group called Silver Condor, and then Kenny Richards, the drummer, was playing in a group called The Coup on A&M Records, and Randy was playing with Lita Ford and recording with her and touring with her. But we always used to get together on the weekends and do these little jam sessions at this little rehearsal place in North Hollywood, just for fun. We'd all known each other from playing in different incarnations of different bands, and so, we were just like good friends from the LA scene. And so what happened was we started writing some original songs together, and we really liked the direction it was going in. Well, Steve Plunkett knew Andy Johns, who was, him and Glenn Johns, his brother. They had, worked with, members of the Beatles, David Bowie, the Rolling Stones. And so they had a really long history of working together, in England and in New York. And so, and then eventually in LA. So Andy was living in LA, and Steve Plunkett asked him, he said, "Hey, come down to one of our rehearsals. We'd love to have you," And so we invited him down, and we sat around drinking beers and stuff. And we played him some songs, and he says, "Hey, I want to hear some of your original stuff." And so we belted out with like 5 of our originals. And he says, "Hey, I love those songs." And so he said, "I've got free time this weekend down at Gower Studios in right in Hollywood there." And he said, "Yeah, he said, you want to cut a demo?" And we go, "Oh, yeah, absolutely." And so we went in and cut a 5-song demo, went in and mixed it the next day. So it was just a Saturday and Sunday thing. And then Kenny at this time was jogging with David Lee Roth. They met every morning at 8:30 and went jogging up and down Sunset Boulevard. And so, David asked him what he was doing musically. And Kenny said, "Well, I've got these guys that I'm jamming with." He said, "I'm still playing with The Coup on A&M. But he said, I got these guys that I've been jamming with. We just finished a demo tape." And so Kenny played him that demo tape when they got done with their jog. And, And David Lee Roth absolutely loved it. He said, "That singer sounds familiar. Who is that?" And it was Steve Plunkett. And he knew who Randy Rand was, too, because Van Halen used to open for Wolfgang back in the mid-'70s, to the late 70s, right before they got their record deal and all that. And so David Lee Roth, he knew who I was, too, when he mentioned my name. And he says, "Oh, yeah, I heard of Steve. His name's pretty well known around the LA area." And so David asked us if we want to go on this tour. And, since we were all done recording with our other projects and didn't have any things to do with them for a few months, we thought, yeah, let's go out and do it. That'd be great. So we wrote some new songs. We came up with a name on the way to the first gig.
I love that. And that you came up with a name on the way.
Because we didn't have a name yet. We were just guys that got together and jammed. So, we wrote some new songs and drove from LA all the way to Jacksonville, Florida, and a dilapidated old Winnebago that we rented. And we made it, and we got on stage, we played, and next thing you know, we're out there, these shows on the East Coast, and these record companies started throwing offers at us. It was like A&M and there was Geffen and Warner Brothers and Epic and everything. And RCA approached us, and they made us a deal that was basically very difficult to refuse. And so we signed backstage at Madison Square Gardens when we were playing there, which is quite epic. Here we are, we're an unknown band, and we're signing with a major record label backstage at Madison Square Gardens. That kind of stuff doesn't happen every day.
No, definitely not. Just like we were saying earlier, another version of being in the right place at the exact right time.
Yeah. And it was one of those things too, whereas right in the beginning of the the tour, I met this girl backstage. She got backstage with her girlfriend, and her name was Suzanne. And we got to talk, and she was sitting on some cases back there away from everybody. And I walked up and said, "Hey, what are you doing up there?" And she looked down at me and said, "Hey, what are you doing down there?" Well, we got to be really good friends. We really hit it off together. And then she was off to school in Providence. She was going away to college in Providence, Rhode Island, and I was living in LA, and I was touring all the time. So we just lost contact. And then 36 years later, just out of the blue, I got a message from her from a dare from some friends she was out to dinner with, and they said, "Hey, what's the first concert you went to?" She said, "Van Halen." She says, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I met this guy in the opening band. I think they were named Autograph or something, and they said, "Well, look him up, see if he's," and so she did, kind of off my dare, and then she messaged me, and we got together, and down here in Tampa, where I live, and she had to come down anyway because she was involved with the Phillies up there, and so she had to come down for the spring training and everything. So we met up, had a great dinner, and we really hit it off again. It was just like the love it was like a love at first sight a second time. And so it was really cool. And so now we're engaged to be married. We got engaged at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So
I was reading that. That is
yeah.
excellent. Very cool.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That is
Thank you.
just amazing. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Very, very cool. Some of the other stuff I was reading here in your book I thought was kind of interesting. When you guys started the Van Halen tour, their management came to you and advised against you doing any of the two-handed tapping thing, as they were saying. They were saying this was Eddie's thing, but then I think I read Ed approached you later on. He says, like, "No, you play what you want."
Right. Well, what happened was, it was after the show we played and they played, and so I was backstage in this little practice room, and I saw Eddie walking by. I said, "Hey, Eddie, come here," and I said, "What's the beef about, me playing two-handed?" I said, "I wrote a book about this in '78 before I'd ever even heard of you. I was fresh in LA and everything, going to the Guitarist, and I showed him the book and everything, and he goes, 'Oh, wow,' and I showed him how to play it and all that. And so we started talking, and then, it was their tour manager that told me I couldn't be playing that because that's Eddie's thing, and I'm going.
He was trying to make a big buzz with that at the time.
Yeah,
for sure.
And so I asked the tour manager what he said, and I said, "Well, can I use my pick, or is that Eddie's thing too?" I mean, really, come on.
Right.
I got strings on this guitar. Can I use those? It's like, come on, everything's not somebody else's. Everybody had, there's so many people that had done that tapping technique before. I don't lay claim to it. And Eddie didn't either.
Right. People showed you how to do it. You were saying that earlier. Other people had shown you.
Exactly. Yeah. So it wasn't a new thing. There were people doing it for decades. And so I told Eddie what the tour manager had said, and then Eddie said, "Look at me, I don't care what you play, go ahead." So we just hit it off from there, and everything was good.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, so I was also reading your distinctive two-handed fretboard tapping technique won you the Guitar Solo of the Year award for Guitar Player magazine in '85, and you conducted 325 guitar clinics in 20 countries. Is that right?
That was after Autograph split up in 1989 because we finished our deal, the 3 albums with RCA, and we were going to do another 3 albums for Epic Records. We were going to sign with them because they loved our demos of the new material and everything. It was a little bit harder edged and a little bit more raw. But the thing is everybody was looking at Seattle for the whole grunge thing because that was just coming in and just wiping out the whole 80s thing.
Right.
And like 80, 89, 1990. And it did. I mean, it completely wiped it out, basically. It was one day the 80s were in, and the next day the whole Seattle grunge thing was in the 90s. And so that was it. And so Epic told us that, we really can't sign you because, there's nothing that we can really do with you because nobody's signing 80s bands anymore. And we understood. We could see it happening from what was being played on the radio. And so we disbanded at the end of the 80s, December of 1989. And that's the very end of the 80s. And so at that point, I thought, well, I have this opportunity where I had done some clinics for St. Louis Music and to promote my books as well. And so I signed on with them and ended up doing 325 clinics, and it was such a great experience, traveling around to all these countries, and I was surprised. I didn't think that outside of America, nobody knew who I was or knew who Autograph was, and I was really pleasantly surprised that everybody was showing up.
That song was getting played everywhere, man.
Yeah,
I remember when that hit and that came out. I had your poster on my walls back in the day.
Yeah.
That was playing everywhere, man.
Yeah, and it was in heavy rotation on MTV and all that. And so
Yep.
I just had no idea, but these guys that were showing up at the guitar clinics, they were, well, can you sign this? And they had all three of our albums, and they had my instructional books already and everything. So going, wow, what a pleasant surprise that I didn't think anybody knew my name over there, but yet I was pretty popular, and so I was taken aback by that. I just thought, that's really cool.
Yeah, well, they got to meet one of their guitar heroes, and you've gotten to meet a couple different one of your guitar heroes.
Oh, yeah.
You got to meet Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page. Some amazing stories for that. Tell us a little bit about Jeff Beck. I thought that was great.
Oh, yeah. Jeff Beck, I saw him play with Beck, Bogart, and Apsey. I think it was 1970 at the Paramount Theater in Seattle. And I was only 15 years old. And so I went there and with the full intention of getting a guitar pick from Jeff, because he was my favorite at that time. I loved Hendrix and Jimmy Page too, but at that time I was really getting into Jeff Beck. And this is when he was playing, like I said, with Beck, Bogart, and Apsey. And so anyway, after the show, he was having a lot of trouble with his equipment and everything. It was breaking down. He walked off stage, threw his guitar and everything, because it was ridiculous. His amps were really acting up, and he was having a terrible time. And so anyway, I waited outside, just pouring down rain. I was freezing my butt off, and I saw there was one limo still left. So I figured the other limo that probably had Carmen Apsey and Tim Bogart in it had already left. So I thought this one's got to be Jeff's. And so sure enough, they came out from that backstage door, and there was Jeff, in an argument with his tour manager because they had so many equipment failures. And so anyway, he started walking towards his limo, and my friend kind of pushed me. He said, go, because I was really scared to go up and ask him, because I knew he had a really bad night.
Right.
And so
maybe not the best time to ask. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, exactly. I thought he was just going to say, get the hell out of my face, or something. But,
right.
But he looked at me, and he could see that I was shivering and I'm soaking wet. And he said, get in the back, mate. So he opened up the door, and I got in the back of the limo with him. And he said, here, let me see what I got here. Because I asked him for the guitar pick, and he was, rummaging around through his Pan Am flight bag. And he found a guitar pick for me, and he says, here you go, take this one. It was a Herkel Heavy. And he gave it to me, and he patted me on the back, and I got out, and he said, good luck to you, mate. I think you're going to go far with this, and so I just went, because he could see my determination just to get a guitar pick, so he thought, this kid's probably going to make it. And so, or at least to some degree. And so I took that pick, and I played with it for years and years and years. I wouldn't play with anything else. And I wore it down to a nub, to the point where you couldn't even use it anymore. It was just, completely gone. And so I carried it around in my hip pocket as a good luck charm. And then 15 years later, AMP show, 1985, I saw Jeff backstage. He was supposed to go on to perform, but he couldn't because he had a broken thumb. And Roger Fisher from Heart was there. He had just designed a new guitar that he had with LED lights going up and down the neck and everything, and a little amp built into it. And he handed it to Jeff and wanted Jeff to play it. And he says, he's had this broken thumb with this big steel thing on it, all taped up and all that. And so Jeff handed it to me. And then I just kind of went, I started playing around with some of the two-handed technique. He looks at me, he goes, what the hell, man? How do you do that? So I showed him a couple of things, and he wasn't able to play it, but he got what I was talking about, the way I was explaining it. And so he said, that's really cool. That's what I'm going to use some of that, actually. And so then I got out my pick from my hip pocket. I still had it. And there was this little nub. And I said, you gave this to me outside of the Paramount Theater in 1970. It was pouring down rain. And he went, oh, my God, you're that kid. he said, I've told this story, and I thought he would never remember it.
Right, because they meet all kinds of people. All
right,
over.
yeah. But for some reason, that story stuck out to him, and he remembered me. And so he said, that was you? And I go, yeah, absolutely. And this is the pick you gave me. And he looked at it, and I handed it to him, and I said, I want you to have it back, and his eyes welled up with tears. So of course mine did too. And everybody that was right back in that perimeter backstage they did too. They thought it was, wow, what an incredible story. And so that was my story with Jeff Beck.
Yeah, cool. What an amazing moment. And obviously just a fantastic guitar player. We lost the sounds that he can make out of a guitar. I don't think anybody else can do or is going to be able to do that. Just amazing.
He continued to do so too. I followed him, from, I was familiar with him back in the Yardbirds, and then when he was playing with Rod Stewart and Jan Hammer and all that, and was making those fusion albums. And so I watched him progress, on through those days when he was, playing "'Cause We Invented His Lovers" and everything, which is an epic song. I actually wrote that whole song out, and I played it at the Guitarist Studio Technology for a performance once, and I was just a complete fan of his, and so to be able to have that interchange with him, that was really cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you also got to meet another hero of yours, Jimmy Page. Also, was he in Zeppelin at the time, or was this before, or Yardbirds?
Oh no, this was he was in Zeppelin. He was still in Zeppelin. It was probably 19. Oh boy. It was at the tail end, because I think it was 1979, and then Bonham passed away, I think, in 1980.
Right.
So I met him backstage at back in the VIP room at the Rainbow. Mario said they were closing up, and Mario, the owner, said, "Hey, Steve, I want you to meet somebody." And so basically what I did was, I followed him back into this VIP area. I didn't even know it was back there. And there was Jimmy Page, and I reached out my hand and I said, "Oh God, Jimmy, it's really, really a pleasure to meet you." He was like a god to me, he was just like a huge guitar god. And so anyway, he shook my hand and he goes, you're that Lynchy guy. You have to do all this stuff." And I go, "Yeah, that's right." So he knew who I was. Right?
He really heard of you then, definitely.
Yeah, he heard of me back then, so that was really cool. And actually, no, I'm sorry, it was after John Bonham passed away.
After he passed.
2 years after that, yeah. So but he was back there. I got to meet him, so that was really cool. So it was actually after Autograph made the first album, so I had my times mixed up a little bit there.
No worries. That's just so very cool. I thought one of the most outstanding stories you have in here with Jimi Hendrix affecting you so much, and you switching to guitar, and then to tell that story to someone and have it turn out to be Jimi Hendrix's dad. That had to just blow your mind. Yeah. Again, in the exact right place, the exact right time.
Right. And so that happened after Jimmy passed away a few years later, I think it was 1973, they had a memorial there. And all these bands from California and New York and even as far away as London, they came there to play. And then plus there was a lot of local musicians as well. To play at the Jimi Hendrix Memorial. And I started talking to this little black guy, and he was just really cool, really had a great sense of humor and everything. And he was talking about Jimmy in depth, after about 20 minutes into the conversation, I said, "How do you know so much about him? This is amazing." Because he's telling me all these stories about him when he was young. He goes, "Well, I'm Al, I'm his dad." I just, wow.
That had to blow your mind. You'd be like, no. Right?
Yeah, and I just gave him a big hug, and again, he teared up, I teared up. It was one of those moments where, God, I'm talking to Jimmy's dad. How cool can this be?
Very, very cool, man. Just so many amazing stories and history of your life in this book, man. So very cool. I really enjoyed it, man. Definitely. So, folks, the new book, Confessions of the Rock Guitarist from Steve Lynch, is out May 20th. Man, thank you so much for sharing this with us today. Really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, Rob. I really appreciate it.
Yep. So that wraps up this episode of Talking About Rock. Thank you to my guest today, Steve Lynch. And shout out to our sponsors, School of Rock North Buffalo and Unleash Music. And to our listeners, we hope you are keeping the torch alive and supporting live music wherever you are. Steve, again, thanks, man.
All right. Thank you.